Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Friday, March 14th. Happy Pie Day. Derek VanRiper, Eno Sarris here with you. Eno not in a ballpark right now, so that's
not eating pie.
Not eating pie. It is only 9:55 in the morning where you are right now. But pie, I think, is a pretty solid breakfast dessert. I feel like we should introduce more pies before noon.
Also, like savory pies are underrated.
Like meat pies and shepherd's pie and all those. I mean, shepherd's pie is not even a pie. There's not even a crust on it. I don't even know why they call it a pie. It's delicious. But there's no crust, so I don't want to get into a whole thing. We've got enough conflict in the world already. But shepherd's pie is delicious, even though I don't really think it resembles pie.
It's not a pie, just a pie in name.
Just a pie in name. It brings back all the old, is it a sandwich debates, which I don't want to do that. Don't want to do that again either. Let's wade into some details about our live podcast coming up less than 2 weeks away already. Bear Bottle Brewing Company, Vernal Heights location, March 27th and March 28th, 4:30 start time both days. March 27th, of course, opening day. So a lot of baseball. We're going to be there watching games before we start recording, pretty much hanging out throughout the afternoon and evening.
Yeah, and it looks like Trevor May will be on the 27th, and then we'll have Ben Clemens from Fangraphs on the 28th as primary guest. But if you listened to or attended the New York shows, you'll know that we will spot people in the crowd that may have projects that may want to talk about them. So we're going to leave that open. And maybe we'll bring Lester on. We should do that. We could bring Lester on to talk about the beer and talk about the collaboration and talk about his fandom. He has a bit of an interesting history there himself. So I think that's something we should do.
Yeah, I think we should do a toast, maybe like an hour into the show, right? An appropriate point in the show, we stop, toast some Kayakers Cove, toast everybody who's there to a great opening day and a great season ahead. I think that might be in order. Lester would be a great fit for that. He's done an awesome job putting everything together for us. Really looking forward to those live shows.
Here's a little tidbit, though, that was kind of interesting. The assistant brewer that was helping us while we were brewing this beer was the assistant brewer at Old Irving.
Really?
When we did EFIS.
Really? I didn't. That's a small world. I mean, I realize like the brewery world is slightly shrinking, but that's a pretty small world coincidence.
Oh, you're standing there next to each other. He's like, "This is the second collaboration beer I've done with you," and I'm like, "What?" I haven't, like, I've done a few, but I haven't done that many, And I'm like, "You don't work at Full Tilt, Yeah, and so the collaboration we did there was a 5% hazy called EFIS that I think they still brew, and it was very popular. So
I should swing back down there someday and get some, because I think I missed EFIS. I had both of the Full Tilt beers. I was either close enough to you when I lived there, or you shipped me some, but those were both great.
I mean, that's wild that they made a beer called Stuff Plus. Like, it's just ridiculous. I will always love them for that. I mean, like, what?
That's absolutely amazing. And then I've got the of course, these have long been consumed, but the sticky stuff too, right?
Sticky stuff. I mean, that's why I think Stuff Plus made sense, because it was a beer that came after Sticky Stuff. So it was like a sequel.
I have too many cans and beverages on my desk.
Don't drink the wrong one. That kind of Friday.
That kind of Friday. Yep. Well, these are empty. There's a little dust.
Okay, good.
But if I drink that, I'm going to know it's nothing and dust at this point. It's been a nice decoration, though, for the office. Let's get to some spring news and notes.
I was there for this.
Yeah, you saw this. We didn't talk about it yesterday because in my mind, I wanted to just forget that it ever happened. Bobby Witt Jr. got drilled by a pitch on Wednesday. Very scary situation when it happened, because it looked like an immediate, fracture or some kind of injury that was going to cost him a lot of time.
He walked right off the field.
Yeah, immediately just took off. Forearm contusion was the final diagnosis. He's day-to-day right now. He basically said if it were opening day or if it were October, he'd be playing. So it doesn't sound like this is going to be a problem with nearly 2 weeks to go before the Royals get their season underway.
That, sometimes they'll say this, and then, you'll also hear from people like, why was your April bad? And like, oh yeah, I got hit by a pitch, early on, and it affected my swing or whatever. So hopefully there's good news that this is happening during spring, and they'll give him more time than usual, and he won't actually have any sort of lingering ramifications. Another thing that was good news was that he wasn't like I could see he wasn't doing the wrist, or the the squeeze test, or they didn't stop and do all that. So, but it was scary. And the one thing hit by pitches is, I guess there's a little bit of predictableness to it with certain batters. I mean, you have your Anthony Rizzos of the world that do have a hit by pitch skill, I guess, or or they just stand really close to the
skill and liability simultaneously. And liability. And some of that is how you set up and where you're comfortable, what you're trying to do as a hitter. Some of that is the quality of the pads that you wear. It's a few different factors, I think, that would make you more or less likely to get hit a lot. But yeah, Anthony Rizzo is the first player that comes to mind in the current era of guys that get hit a lot. I think Starling Marte was one for a while too.
Yeah, he has the body armor on, and he just sort of hangs out there. But you wouldn't guess who led the league last year in hit by pitches and is fourth overall over the last 3 years.
Andres Jimenez? No, he's an outfielder.
Yo, that was good, dude. He's second over the last 5 years.
He just seems like a guy that would get hit a lot. I don't know why. I don't know why. It's just
Randy Arozarena led him last year and is fourth overall in the last 5 years. Ty France is out there to get hit.
The gold standard.
Yeah, he's the leader over the last 5 years, and if he had more playing time, would have been probably led last year. Pete Alonso gets hit a lot too. I mean, I guess would you put a little asterisk next to these guys? It's uh-oh. And why is Jeff McNeil out? Because he's a hit by pitch guy too. Oh, it's an oblique. Okay. Brandon Nimmo misses time sometimes. He's in the top 10. I don't know. Would you put an asterisk next to any of these guys? It's maybe won't play as much as we think.
I would consider taking the perennial or the chronic hit by pitch guys. If we had good data for this and we figured out they typically lose 50 plate appearances or 80 plate appearances a season. If we could quantify this, I'd be very interested in utilizing it. Gut feel, it's something I have not adjusted for in the past.
No, it's not something. And I doubt it's something that any projection system puts in unless they just say he has missed time in the past, and so therefore,
Right. And I think some of that's kind of random too, though. You're going to get hit. Sometimes you're going to hit in the hands, sometimes you're going to hit in the fingers, sometimes you're going to get in the elbow, sometimes you're going to hit in the meaty part of the shoulder. Sometimes you're going to get hit on the butt. There's a bunch of different. Where you get hit also matters a little bit.
Chaos.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a chaos thing. So I'd be pretty strict to the numbers if I was going to try and account for that. Have not done that so far, but glad to hear Bobby Witt Jr. is likely to be fine here in a matter of days. So the reporting on the George Kirby situation is throwing us for a little bit of a loop this morning. Shannon Dreyer had a report that George Kirby had a Biologics injection in his shoulder, and my first thought was that's probably PRP, but I'm not sure. And I started looking it up, and I think Biologics injections are just the broader class of injections that include PRPs. So it may or may not have been a platelet-rich plasma injection, but nonetheless, it is an injection with some kind of living organisms to help improve healing in the shoulder of George Kirby. And I think more importantly than the specific nature of what he had injected into his shoulder is that it was all sort of planned. He wanted to pitch through this, and the Mariners said no, and he may be able to return to strength activities in 3 to 4 days, according to Shannon Dreyer's report. So I think we're still kind of in this probably isn't terrible situation with George Kirby, but thinking about the different adjustments we're making in rankings and seeing that he fell pretty far in our Champions League that we're doing right now, there may be a good discount worth taking on Kirby in some draft rooms.
Yeah, the difficulty for me is just that I've just been reading this piece from Casey Mulholland at Connect Pro. He's he's kind of doing a not a rebuttal, but a response to the MLB study on injury. And his focus is fatigue. And he says, when you see these spikes, there are two spikes in injuries. And we've talked about this on the show. There's the March spike in injury, and then there's an August spike in injury. And he says, it's obvious that the March spike in injury has something to do with roster rules. And like, you don't have to put a guy on the IL until, opening day. So there's obviously going to be these spikes, around those roster rule days. But August doesn't have the same roster rule. But what it does have in common with March is a period of rest right before. And so his thing is like, some of the injury situations going on right now has to do with our idea of how to limit injury is to like limit pitches, limit starts, more rest. But the problem with that is that you don't build up. We've talked about acute to chronic ratio on the show, which is like the idea that you need to, like, if the easiest way to think about it is if you're going to run a marathon tomorrow. I mean, if you're going to run a marathon, you're not going to run it tomorrow. You have to build up the sort of ability to get there. So you have to run 3 and then 5. You sort of get there. You build up the ability. So if a pitcher wants to pitch a full game, they need to build up to get that. Now, I'm not saying the Mariners won't do that. But, like starting strength activities could be like it's now February 25th for him, and he's going to have to build up slowly from there. So he could still miss a month, I think.
Yeah, it could still be a month, but then you may, again, heavy emphasis on may, you may get a 5-month window where George Kirby is pretty much himself once he comes back because they took the more conservative, more cautious approach to getting out in front of this injury. Still comes with risk, but I'm cautiously optimistic here.
I'm doing a working ranks. The full ranks will come out next week. I have maybe not dinged him enough. I give him 150 innings because he's been so good in innings otherwise. And he's 16th in the working ranks. I have a feeling if I investigate that further, he may fall more to the kind of Yamamoto, Strider, Sasaki area, which is the early 20s. I'd still... Would you rather have George Kirby or Yoshinobu Yamamoto?
I would take Yamamoto today. And I say that as a Kirby health optimist relative to
how about Strider then? Because Strider has the same shape. Yamamoto's at least healthy now, right? So he could theoretically go further. How about Strider, who's not healthy to begin?
That's a good toss-up. I might be more inclined to take Kirby than Strider. I would bucket them very similarly. My interest in Strider is greater in leagues with IL spots because I just want that roster spot. I think that's because there's also the possibility Kirby's back maybe a week or two ahead of Strider. They're saying late April for Strider. They do have a trip to Coors on the schedule, though, at the end of the month. I don't think you want to bring someone back off the IL and drop them in Coors for their first start back, but
how about George Kirby versus Luis Castillo?
Ooh. Kirby.
That gets harder, right?
Yeah, that's a tough call, too. What's the gap right now between Castillo and Strider, though, in your rankings? Is there a gap there, or are they also clustered together? I have Castillo behind Strider just because Castillo is oatmeal to me, and I don't think he has the ability to dominate anymore the way that Strider could dominate for 4 or 5 months. Okay.
So I have Castillo with like Aaron Nola, right? Like I have a little tier of like, for the yo-yo or whatever. Like, if you did get Strider, then you probably want, or if you got Garrett Crochet, you kind of maybe want Aaron Nola over Spencer Strider, right?
Yeah.
Or, so that's where I have Castillo. Kirby is weird because he used to have the bulk of the Luis Castillo, Aaron Nola tier, but he has the upside of the Spencer Strider tier. So I do think that's where he belongs. He belongs somewhere in that group.
Yeah, that's where I'm comfortable beginning to put Kirby onto my rosters, given what we have information-wise right now. Another catcher injury popped up. Tyler Stephenson's going to go on the IL with what they're calling a low-grade oblique strain. So hopefully hopefully it's only an April thing and not a multiple weeks beyond that kind of thing. But that's kind of a big deal if you're trying to wait on catchers. I think Stephenson was pretty fairly priced before this injury news, and even more so than Francisco Alvarez. I think it makes it harder to draft Stephenson because he's just a hair below that threshold of a player that you want to wait on in most mixed leagues, right?
Especially if it's a one catcher league. He's like the 10th best catcher in a one catcher league.
And maybe, he might even be like 14th, 15th, more like that range. Where
that was before him.
Yeah. You're kind of like streaming him anyway in a one catcher league. You're trying to play the matchups, maybe use him at home, play somebody else. Otherwise, I think this is enough to sort of bump him out of the mix for me in mixed leagues. Mono leagues still fine. IL leagues, endgame maybe, but I'd be a little more careful with Stephenson now as a result of this injury. Edward Cabrera may miss his next spring start. Apparently, it's just blisters. And I saw a report saying he has chronic blister and fingernail issues. How many pitchers deal with frequent blister and fingernail problems like this? Is this a bigger problem than people realize?
It's a lot. I mean, just in camp today, I forget whose picture I was taking. I was taking his Grips picture, and he had stuff all over his fingernail. And he said he
like a gluey sort of
like a bonded,
tried to
cracked
heal it.
He kind of cracked it, and he was trying to he put something on it to kind of keep it together. And I see that stuff a lot. And then when I thought I was having blister issues, and it was chilblains, the COVID toe situation. I was doing a lot of research on blisters, and it brought back all the Rich Hill had a blister problem, Josh Beckett had a blister problem, and I was doing a lot of toe pickling because they talked about putting their fingers in pickle juice. But that's it. And then there was wasn't it Moises Alou that was peeing on his hands for blisters? So
I don't want to go back in the past, and I don't want to search that.
Yeah, okay.
I just don't. I'm not going to search it.
So,
I'm sorry.
Edward, get the pickle juice out. Pee on the hands. Start figuring this one out. Usually, I think what happens is a lot of these pitchers have it, and they figure something out that gets them past it.
Yes, and I hope whatever maintenance that is, if it's any more gross than pickle juice, they just keep it themselves. I don't actually want to know what remedies are being used. I just want to know if they can get these under control. And Cabrera seems to have more recurring problems with his fingers, with the blisters and the fingernails. So keep that in mind as you try and stash him away, maybe as a late pitcher of interest. Eno's still in for one more year, right?
One last ride.
One last ride. Well, you've been on the move. We didn't talk a lot about what you were doing in Maryvale. We recorded our episode yesterday with Trevor May, and you were in the ballpark in Maryvale. And there were a few people you talked to that I think are pretty interesting. You talked about Tobias Myers with that body blade as something that he was utilizing. But I think Myers is someone I keep throwing onto rosters late because I'm probably a homer, even though I try not to be. And I think his job security in that rotation is actually pretty solid right now. We know that his pitches look really similar by shape coming out of his hand. So that he has that sort of added deception, one of those kind of newer things we've been seeing people report on now. And I think there's also that possibility of just one more gear because he's changed organizations before. And maybe now he's got that right fit. He's got an organization that knows how to optimally utilize his stuff. So I'm just curious, what else you picked up while you're at Brewers camp, either talking to Tobias or anybody else you had a chance to catch up with?
Well, first of all, I just really enjoyed talking to him. He's, him and Andres Munoz from Mariners camp were my favorite people to talk to for different reasons. I mean, Munoz is kind of heady and does obviously care about his craft. Has added a sinker and a changeup over time. And you could have just been like, hey, I'm a forcing fastball slider 100-mile-an-hour guy. Why do I need these other pitches, But also, both of them just have this, they're good dudes. I don't know, they are smiling and are polite to people and engaging and present and inquisitive. And I just found them both a real joy to talk to just generally. And in the context of me also pursuing a story about makeup and what makeup is, like when I was talking to them, I was like, these guys have good makeup. I don't know how to exactly explain it. And that's what the story will be about. But, so Myers, we did talk about a little bit about his journey. And so he was a Rays pitcher that was traded for Junior Caminero. And that must have been a devastating moment in Guardians history. I feel like there must have been. It reminds me a little bit of like the Josh Fields for Yordan Alvarez, where like once that happens as an organization, you're like, what? And I think what I've actually heard in both cases, they sort of upped their self-scouting after that. After trades like that, you like take one of your scouts and you say, we don't want to miss a guy again. Can you just turn your eyes around? Don't look at the other teams. Look at our team and tell us like, who we might be missing on so that we don't trade. And what I'm not saying that Tobias Myers is terrible. It's just like you'd rather have Junior Caminero.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable thing to say.
Yeah, right. But he goes from, Tampa Bay Rays, well-regarded, to the Guardians, who are well-regarded. And then he goes to the Brewers, who are well-regarded, all in terms of pitching development. And I asked him, how different were these places? He goes, Tampa's just like Milwaukee. Like, I hear the same things from Milwaukee that I heard in Tampa. And so he was talking about, to some extent, rip it. He talked about the one target thing. He said in Tampa, like, until you get to AAA, you're not even allowed to have more than one target. Like, just everybody is a one target guy until like AA or something. And so he was like, it was one target all the way through, and it was all about, repeating your delivery and rip it and kind of, basically just aim middle and let the different movements on your pitches go into different places, And he said that once he got to Cleveland, it was a little bit more put it in these places. And sometimes I think about I think that teams sometimes have patron saints. Like they have these things that worked out in the past. It's almost like the opposite of like losing Caminero. So if you had Francisco Lindor and Jose Ramirez, and they were two guys that made a lot of contact and had good plate discipline and added power as they grew, you might, as an organization, say, let's just get a lot of guys who have good plate discipline and make contact and hope they add power over time. It hasn't really worked the same way to produce another Lindor or Ramirez, but you're kind of like, keep waiting for the next one. Maybe it's Brito. Brito profiles similarly in a lot of ways, except just doesn't hit the ball as hard and hasn't yet. But hit a homer at camp the other day I was watching. It was kind of good. But anyway, he said they were more about placing it. And what has worked for the Guardians in the past, they've had Kluber, who's a god of command, and Shane Bieber, who has great command. And those are probably, in some levels, their touchstones, their patron saints of pitching development. And so they get Tobias Myers, and they're like, we think you have great command. And guys in the past who had great command, they told him apparently to do some front door sinkers. That's the Corey Kluber. Like, that's what Corey Kluber did. And he was just like, I might have good command, but I don't have that command. He's like, that's not. I don't like aiming at the pitch at the batter.
Okay, so that kind of ties into the nice person, good makeup vibe you're getting too. Yeah, I don't want to throw it at the guy. That's not cool.
And so he said it was a little bit like more about precision there, and like a lot of game planning that had to do with like different quadrants and different things they wanted to do in different places. And then when he got back to Milwaukee, he's a little bit more like, hey, just rip it. Let's rip it through here. And he said Chris Hook was all about like just nasty stuff in the zone. Just do your nastiest in the zone. One thing that we did also talk about that is underrated about him from a stuff angle is that he has a good four seam. And I quizzed him. I told him what Stuff Plus was. And I was like, now that you know what Stuff Plus is, what do you think is your best pitch by Stuff Plus? And he got it right.
He knew.
I didn't think he would, because he only throws the changeup 11% of the time. And so you'd think if that was your best pitch, like, wouldn't you throw it more? But he said it's a straight change. And so it's a little bit finicky in terms of command. It's not necessarily something he wants to like, he can't really Yeah, it's not. He can't rip it as much as the other pitches. He said what he's trying to do, because he can't spin the ball that well, and that's something you can see from his Stuff Plus profile too, is just throw the slider really hard. And I was like, I heard that from Casey Mize. You know, like if I just throw like a gyro, like boring slider, but it's 90, like that's gonna look like my fastball, but be different, and that'll work. So I think that Tobias Myers in some ways is where Casey Mize needs to look. You know, and Casey Mize looked great this spring. So there's also, I have this bias away from changeup guys, you know, and we talked about Trevor May just yesterday. But Myers and Mize, you know, they do tell you a little bit how it can take a long time to put together if you're changeup first, right? But they also tell you that there are roadmaps for these players. It's so weird that we've flipped baseball on its head. It was like, do you have a changeup? You know. Now it's like, I don't care if you have a changeup. Do you have a breaking ball? Can you spin it?
Yeah, and I wonder if you're in his position, you're Tobias Myers, you're 26 years old now, and you don't have a great feel for spin yet. When do you finally say, "Yep, I'm not going to throw breaking balls more than 30% of the time. It's just never going to be my game." Like maybe he sort of reached that point. Maybe that's where the multiple fastballs guys now have like a second life or a second path they can go down that will actually give them a major league career. Whereas 10 or 15 years ago, that wasn't necessarily a lever that as many teams and player development groups were willing to pull.
Yeah, I think he's also better for having the fastball and the cutter and the slider. And, you know, I do think the upside for him is upping the sinker usage. He threw a little bit last year, and then upping the changeup usage. And he seemed to think that could be a possibility. You know, so anyway, he's kind of, for me, he's kind of in between 12 and 15 teamers.
Yeah.
I did just drop him in my 12 teamer. You know, it's like I don't know that he has the upside to be like, oh, I really want this guy. But he's great oatmeal for 15 teamers. I actually really like him as a guy that I think will throw 160 plus innings, and they'll be pretty decent.
Two things I noticed in Tobias Myers splits. Neither of these things are really surprising when you think a lot about them. The splits against righties are really good. 21.2% K minus BB percentage. Righty strikes out just over a quarter of the righties he faces. Only walks 4.5%.
Which is pretty good because he only strikes out 22% overall.
Right. The lefties gave him a lot more trouble last year. The K rate goes under 20% against lefties. Walk rate goes over 8%. So it's a 10.7% K minus BB. It's a 136 whip against them compared to an even 1 against righties, just to kind of put it in the context of whip. Home and away, though, you see kind of a similar split. He was great at home. Overall at home, 25% K rate, 5.7% walk rate, 102 whip. You know, just a little bit of a home run problem because the park does boost homers. But on the road, 12.5% K minus BB, the sub 20% K rate, a slightly higher walk rate. And we talk about it with the Trop a lot. We talk about it with T-Mobile in Seattle. American Family Field, ballpark in Milwaukee, is another one of those parks that does boost up Ks a little bit. And with the roof closed, as often as it's closed, you create that more consistent environment. And I think that might matter a little bit more when you don't have the superlative stuff across the board. You don't have the arsenal full of plus pitches. So I think conditionally, I do look at him much more as like a home streamer. And then if you see a lineup that can just load up a bunch of lefties against him, maybe you try to steer away from that matchup too. When you start getting to that level, you get to that level of conditional matchups, that is harder to rely upon as a regular fixture on your roster in a 12-team league. A very good pitcher. I wonder what else he could do to improve against lefties. That would be the next step that would unlock him being.
For me,
better
the obvious answer
leagues.
is throw the changeup more.
Yeah,
you know.
At least,
but if you said the walk rate is higher, maybe that is the problem. He's not able to throw the changeup more because he can't command it as well, and that's why the walk rate is higher against lefties. He's probably the changeup usage is a little bit higher against lefties, probably.
Since we're talking about some deeper league pitchers, you wrote about deep league sleepers. There's another guy in Brewers camp that actually popped, and you put together a board for the story on The Athletic. We'll throw it up on the screen if you're watching us on YouTube. Late bargains by projections. We're looking for after pick 300 by ADP over at the NFBC with PPERA projections below 4 Aaron Savali is the other Brewer that pops by that criteria. And man, I think of oatmeal pitchers that I'm drafting late. Aaron Savali, I think, is another kind of oatmeal pitcher that makes a lot of sense as one of the last pitchers on your roster.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if he had similar splits to what he did in Tampa. Now that you're talking about how Ks are augmented and they close the doors a lot, like I feel like Savali thrived in Tampa, but had pretty bad home away splits. So, but even in a weekly league, deeper 15-team leagues that are weekly leagues, you could still be like, oh, Savali has 2 at home, or if he has a 2-start week and one's home, one's away, you might still use them. So I'd say Savali's like a kind of guy. Like one of the reasons I liked Lugo last year was he projected pretty well. He, the park was a good fit, and I thought worst case scenario, I'm going to start Lugo 75% of the time. You know what I mean? And that's kind of how I feel about Savali. It's like, it's not a sexy pick. It's not a stuff plus. I mean, there is a little bit of stuff plus action there, but it's he's not like totally different than he used to be. Just doesn't have a great fastball. Has like 3 breaking balls that he sometimes struggles to keep separate. They're kind of very similar, all of his breaking balls. But at home, I think I will start Savali most of the time at home and maybe half the time on the road. And that's sort of what I thought Lugo might be. I didn't think Lugo would be, get Cy Young votes last year. So Savali's, but no, just to throw that up real quick, I do like other names on there because Verlander's a very similar actually use case for me than Savali. Is like, I think I'll use him at home most of the time, and there's a chance he recovers. He talked in camp about his neck really hurting him, and he's getting his old delivery back. Edward Cabrera was on the show today. Dustin May looks like he's, with Tony Gonsolin's back injury, looks like Dustin May is the 5th starter in L.A. David Festa and Ben Brown, I think, are 6 starters, and Kumar Rocker, everybody knows his situation where it's like, he's great. Is he in the rotation? But I did want to ask you what you thought about Reid Detmers.
I don't think about Reid Detmers a lot.
Is that like the Mad Men thing? Like, I don't think about you at all.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't trying to go down that road, but may have accidentally done that.
Yeah.
Why isn't Reid Detmers better? I come back to this all the time. I mean, the last season, things ticked up a little bit in terms of underlying skills. We saw the best Sierra he's ever posted as a big leaguer. It was only 87 and a third big league innings last year, 377 Sierra. But he had a massive home run problem that basically put the ratios into the stratosphere of unusable. It's a massive blow-up. It's a 670 ERA, a 156 whip, but 109 Ks in 87 and a third innings. The highs and lows with Detmers have been all over the place. We've seen that. Like the peaks and valleys are about as wide as any pitcher we've seen break in the last 4 or 5 years, right? He's still just 25. And
he still has a great slider.
Still has a great slider. We've seen a little more velo the last 2 seasons than when he came up, so that feels better. So I think I'm just sort of like blindly in, even though I can't fully explain why he struggles so much. And because he's a lefty and because he's an Angel, I feel like we asked a lot of the same questions about Andrew Heaney for the early stretches of Andrew Heaney's career. Like you think about Heaney as one of those guys that was always on breakout and sleepers lists earlier in his career because if it all clicks, it's going to be good. That's the Reid Detmers movie tagline poster. If it all clicks, it might be pretty good. And year after year after year, Andrew Heaney was a guy that also underperformed his ERA indicators. And the best versions of Heaney we saw were the years where he was just more of a workhorse, right? There was the 1 year in 2018, threw 180 innings, struck out 180 guys. That's fine in deep leagues, even with a 4.15 ERA and a 120 whip, but it still wasn't quite the ceiling we'd hoped for from a guy that had been the 9th overall pick when the Marlins took him forever ago. And Detmers, same kind of draft pick, same kinds of expectations, college guy, lefty, lots of polish. I don't know. I don't know if it's that there's a disconnect between the pitching coordinators and pitching coaches and what they think Detmers should do and what he himself thinks he should do, but something just feels a little bit off. Like the results should be better for the skills that he flashes.
Yeah, I mean, even just to look at K-BB for his career, 25 Ks, 20% Ks, 9% walks, like that should be an above average pitcher. And then it comes with a 4.90 ERA career. And it's just like, what is happening here? It's been homers a lot. It's, for some reason his BABIPs have been really high. And maybe that's just something that needs to regress and just has been randomly high. But I do see that his better year, his best or one of his better years in terms of quantity plus quality, he threw the slider more. And I think that that's an easy thing for him to do. He should go back to throwing it 30% of the time at least. He's shown a propensity to spin the ball. And so I know it's a little bit risky for a guy who has a slider and a curve and a four seam, but his four seam gets whooped. And it gets whooped especially by lefties. So I feel like this. Well, actually, last year he only had a 241 slugging against the four seam. That's not bad, but I do think a cutter would just help him reduce the usage of the four seam. And maybe it's the sinker. He threw 62 sinkers last year, 105 in 2023. That's another pitch he threw fewer in 2024 in a bad year. Actually, I'm looking. He threw fewer sinkers last year, 67 versus 117. I think he should up that sinker usage to like 15% and take most of that off of the cutter and throw to righties, just throw all his pitches to righties basically. And I think that's something that a pitching coach would tell him, and maybe he just doesn't like that plan, or there is something missing. But that you give me an elite slider like he has, and you give me a good strike on his walk rate, and I'm still interested. It's like the Edward Cabrera thing. Like I'm still in.
And you can correct
the price keeps getting cheaper too, right?
Yeah, right. It's just you keep throwing the darts. Maybe this is the year. You can find things to like about him. I think it falls into that. Why hasn't it happened yet? Because they've made some changes in the organization during his time there. He has not had all of the same voices in his ear the entire time that he's been in Anaheim either. So it's not true. It's not just
he had our boy Bill Hazel for a while, and then now he's got I forget his pitch.
Yeah, who's the actual pitching coordinator?
He's the pitching coach is the former pitcher.
Matt Wise?
No. It's he's got a funny name.
A funny name?
Yeah.
Like a funny ha-ha kind of name, or?
Well, no, just like a kind of like a. I'll know it as soon as I say Barry Enright.
Oh yeah, Barry.
I think it's funny because it doesn't sound like a baseball player. It sounds like a lawyer.
Yeah, it's the Barry. It's just Barry.
Barry. Barry's a general. I mean, Barry Bonds was obviously one of the best baseball players of all time. It's a funny first name for a guy.
It doesn't sound like a pitcher.
No.
I mean, running back, of course. Barry.
Yeah, maybe.
But to the why isn't Reid Detmers better question, the other thing I think about when I'm trying to explain the large gaps between an ERA indicator and the actual results is how much hard contact do you allow overall? Like, we don't talk a lot about hard hit rates for pitchers, but over multiple years, especially if you see someone who is among the worst in baseball at the type of contact they allow, that might actually mean something, right? It means you're not locating very well, or guys are seeing it well, or there's not a lot of ride on the fastball, or whatever else. 39.6% hard hit rate. It's not like at the top of the league.
It's not great.
But that's a 3-year snapshot from 2022 to 2024. It's kind of wild. Garrett Cole also right there next to Reid Detmers in that category. Kind of bizarre. You see some good pitchers kind of sprinkled in here.
Which is why we don't use it too much.
Yeah. So it's just like, what is wrong? I don't know exactly. I think he's still worth throwing the late dart on if you're trying to find innings in a deep, deep league. The other guy that came up in our prep for this show is a name that I have not drafted at all. Mitch Spence. What's going on with Mitch Spence? What makes him interesting? I mean, I think we were looking at Tobias Myers before, pretty strong splits. Aaron Savali, by the way, for his career has been better by K-BB against lefties than against righties. That's kind of weird. What is interesting about Mitch Spence?
Something similar. It's a really boring arsenal. And so it is not, again, like, I think I've gotten in trouble in the past in these articles, like just, ogling the Joe Boyles of the world, and the Edward Cabreras. So in this case, I'm hyping a guy with a 99 stuff plus overall and a 103 location plus that has, 4 pitches that he goes to regularly, has an attack plan at the plate, and had a 4.58 ERA last year with a 19% strikeout rate and a 6% walk rate. It's like very average, sounds like, and it may just be very average. But one thing that's kind of cool about Spence is how it fits together. So he has the type of stuff where he has a cut. It's a cut fastball. It's not necessarily a cutter. It's a fastball he cuts. And that gives him a fastball that really works against lefties. And, the other pitches in his arsenal also work in a way that they're useful against both lefties and righties. He's very platoon neutral. In fact, he has a reverse stuff split. He has a 101 stuff plus against lefties and a 99 against, or 98 against righties. And I'm okay with that because it's not such a big differential. He doesn't have a great changeup. So it's not like you're going to John Danks theory him. So there was this old theory that John Danks had reverse platoon splits because he had a great changeup but no good slider. And so teams would actually put same-handed guys in against John Danks. I think the Rays might have been one of the first to do it. And it was called the Danks theory. And I don't think that Spence has that kind of cachet. He doesn't have a great changeup. No teams are never going to be like, "Oh, we're facing Mitch Spence. Better load up the lineup with lefties today." So I think he'll just continually be like a credible pitcher. The little ounce of upside that does reside in his body is he's up 2 ticks this spring, and it's stayed steady into longer outings. So if you take a guy that's super platoon neutral and you give him 2 ticks, maybe you get a few more strikeouts, or maybe he avoids a few homers this year. Maybe the park doesn't play as negative as everybody says. Oopsie says a 4.18 ERA. It's an oatmeal play with just a tiny bit of brown sugar, upside crusted on the top. You have that nice brown sugar.
I know.
Are we torturing the oatmeal analogy at this point?
No, you're describing what I eat every day, and I said, I got to get away from that. When I get to the draft table, I don't want more.
Yeah, breakfast. You don't like these guys. You don't love these guys. But I think maybe it's draft and hold season that had me there. But also in deep leagues, breakouts come from a lot of places that people don't expect, and so I'm willing to take shots at different profiles. So in our league that we were in together, Devil's Rejects, where you keep 28 players, it's 20 teams, so 560 players are off the board. 2 of my first 4 picks in the 600 range were Osvaldo Bido, I think has much more upside, and then Mitch Spence, just to be like, some weeks I just want to have an option that won't poop the bed.
Right. Yeah. In the league that deep, anybody that's a useful starter with a projection like that is definitely worth rostering. I think
we may look back and be like, Mitch Spence had the better season than Osvaldo Bido.
Right. Even though Bido pops more in the model, and when you watch him, just looks like the better of the 2 pitchers. I think that's kind of interesting with Mitch Spence that I had not previously noticed. You don't really see any great runs in terms of ratios anywhere in the minors. He was in the Yankee system. Which trade was he a part of? He had been a part of a trade, right?
Yeah, what was he? Waldachuk and Spence came together?
That sounds right. Nevertheless, doesn't matter. Came out of the Yankees organization. Swinging strike rates 13% and higher throughout his time in the minor leagues. Did that with a lot of 21 and 22% K rates. Maybe a little more swing and miss coming in the future. It might not be like a future 25% K rate guy in the big leagues, but at least had appropriate age to level. It wasn't old for the level. It wasn't young either, but it was showing kind of interesting
Rule 5
skills.
Guy.
Spence was a Rule 5 pick? Oh.
Yeah.
How about that? That's pretty good for a Rule 5 pick. I
agree. The swing strike rates being higher than the strikeout rates is interesting. Yeah. I think that could be maybe a cutter thing. I don't know why. And this spring, his swing strike rate is more in line with that minor league one that you're talking about. It's up to 13%.
Yeah, K-rate hasn't moved with it yet, but, hey, nice spring so far for Mitch Spence, and a guy that hasn't really got a lot of love on the show up to this point. Now, you were also talking to Craig Yoho in Maryvale. Did you actually get to talk to Craig Yoho?
I need to have a team where I do the YOLO yo-yo with Yoho. He's great because he basically was taught the Devin Williams airbender. Like, he doesn't throw it exactly. It's not an exact copy of it, but Stuff Plus loves it. It's one of the top 3-4 pitches in AAA last year by Stuff Plus. And he obviously studied Devin Williams. When I asked him about it, he's like, "Oh yeah, it's very much like Devin Williams. I do the same kind of. I'm really aggressively pronating over the top of it. It comes off my ring finger, very much like Devin Williams. It's not as quite as beautiful, but it is pretty beautiful to watch. But he's really proud of his breaking ball because he had this breaking ball, and the reason he got drafted by the Brewers in the first place is that it's a 3,000 RPM breaking ball. And he started describing to me the metrics on it in terms of he called it a slurve, and he said it was this. I forget exactly the numbers he gave me, but it was like this X and this Y in terms of movement. And I was like, that's Ryan Presley. So you've got a guy with, a young man's fastball, a Devin Williams changeup, and a Ryan Presley curveball. The one problem he's really had is staying in one piece. He's had a few surgeries. Some of them were freak. I think he got hurt as a position player one time. I think he hurt himself playing in the field. But he also had Tommy John. He's had trouble staying healthy. He's also has options when there are other veterans around. He may not make the opening day rotation, but I do think he's the next Milwaukee Brewers closer. I don't know if it's going to happen this year because they have McGill for a while, and they do this where they groom the next closer, right? And then they trade their closer when he has 1 or 2 years left. They've done this repeatedly. So I think Trevor McGill will get traded at some point, and Yoho will take over. I just can't tell you exactly when that'll be.
Well, if you had to ballpark it, after 2027, Trevor McGill will be a free agent. So probably after 2026, if he's still a healthy, effective closer, he would be
or
a
trade deadline 2026 if they're not competitive.
Right. There would be your rough timetable. Yeah, Yoho, elbow and knee surgeries that cost him complete seasons in 2021 and 2022. So I think that's part of the how'd this guy sneak through and why is he a little bit overlooked outside of Milwaukee? It's a big part of it. It's health, but yeah, turning that over.
He was drafted for spin rate and the slider, so
when you
that's
said
not what people think of him.
When you said a 3,000 RPM breaking ball, I thought of Trent Thornton.
Ooh, interesting.
There's a random name that had the really good spin rates, and it just didn't come together. Health was a factor too, I think, with Trent Thornton and why he didn't get there.
And he's got another chance in the Seattle bullpen. He's getting more chances in bullpens now, and he could have a second life where Thornton comes back and he's spinning it again.
So the timetable for Yoho might be further into the future than most people want. You talked about Devil's Rejects, the 20-team Dynasty League we're playing in, and it's like you're not generally trying to stash relievers that are that far away. Like you maybe with your last roster spot for a little while can just wait and see if it happens sooner than expected. But predicting future closers in dynasty leagues doesn't bear a lot of fruit. It's like having too many catchers. It's one of those things. You just generally don't do it. I
just always have 4 roster slots, or 3 or something in Devil's Rejects. And just have guys in there, just rotate them through. And
yeah. I think with McGill, it's also it's not a long track record of big league success. He could just struggle and the door's open. And I think who closes next is a fair question to ask about that Brewers team. So it's more of a...
It could come faster than...
Yeah, the soonest would be 2020. If McGill's struggling and Yoho is on the roster at that point in the season, then you start thinking about it more as an in-season pickup this year.
Because right now they could still paper over it with Piamps, who's not a great closer, but he's a capable guy, and he's done short closing stints before, and they still have Abner Uribe, who has lights out stuff and no command, and if he's healthy, he might be the first guy who gets on that roster, because he was given the first shot. So it is something to stick around for later. I would prefer, if I was looking to stash closers, like future closers, I would prefer to look on Major League rosters right now.
All right. So who are you looking at for future closers?
I don't want to spend a lot of time thinking about it. I think Justin Slayton is right there. And I think Liam Hendriks' stuff this spring has not been good. You could use Chapman, but he also has poor command. And he's a lefty, so you may have a tandem situation there. But I'm excited about him from a stuff angle. I wish his fastball is a little bit better, but he does have a 4-pitch mix. And he does have a dominant secondary pitch that he could even throw more often, I think, with the curveball. So I don't know, though. He may, on some sites he's already listed as a co-closer, so it may not be a great answer for you.
I keep looking at Hunter Biggie. I think I mentioned him in the AL East team previews. The Rays, they've got plenty of options, but the reason that I keep getting drawn to Biggie, 3 above average pitches by stuff, an average location plus number, that's a really good recipe for someone that could end up in some pretty high leverage spots. They still have Fairbanks. Fairbanks is healthy right now. Uceda was good at the end of last year, so it's not going to be a straight line path, but I think Biggie's just one of those names I've got circled that I'm watching really closely to see how he does when he gets his first opportunities in 2025, and then, of course, just watching that bullpen as a whole to see how the chairs might get moved around.
Yeah, I was I heard some good things about Mark Church's slider when I was in Texas camp. And he was getting attention from the media, which surprised me a little bit. Like he had like 2 or 3 interviews in a row. And I think that's partially because he's striking out a third of the batters he's seeing. His manager mentioned him as a possibility. And his slider may be the best single pitch in that bullpen. I don't know if the 4-seam fastball is great, but he's also got enough touch on the slider that he can throw it, a ton. He can throw it as much as how much was he throwing it? Where is this here? 53% of the time. So he pitches backwards a little bit. And in that sort of scenario, I think, not having the best fastball. I have said before that these are not my favorite types of closer options, but there is the relative quality of the bullpen around him to consider. Where I think Chris Martin's fine, but I do think there's opportunity there because until somebody like Emiliano Teodo becomes a reliever, which is not going to happen this year, they don't necessarily have a young guy that's coming up that's going to blow Mark Church away with his stuff. And that bullpen could use a new closer this year.
Want some breaking news? We got some breaking news.
Uh-oh, that doesn't sound good.
It's not always good. In this case, it might not be good. Austin Riley just left Friday's Grapefruit League game, apparently as a precaution after getting hit by a pitch on the right hand. And that's the same hand that he fractured last year. It cost him time at the end of the season. So they're saying it's precautionary, but you need... Don't you need imaging to know for sure?
Yeah.
At least keep an eye on that going into your drafts this weekend, just in case they do give him an X-ray to make sure, because that's brutal. That's literally the same hand that was broken last season.
That's no good.
Yeah, sorry to take the wind out of your sails with the sad breaking news at the end of the show about a player possibly walking off with an injury. I wanted to ask you some questions as we get into our mailbag segment. The main event drafts at the NFBC have started up, and you play in the main event. We had JH, our friend, you co-managing that event with, on the show earlier in the offseason. How much do you care about the results of the main events that happen before yours? Do you look at those boards? Do you study them? Do you look at the main event drafts only in isolation on the ADP report? I mean, what do you think the value is for people competing in subsequent main events, and what is the value beyond the NFBC ecosystem for people out there that are just looking for signs of what other folks are doing with their roster builds and maybe players that are really aggressively pursued in the higher end of the high stakes market?
you can go too far where I think then you just subscribe to the group think, right? You're just, oh, this is what the group thinks. And I don't think you need to change what you feel about a player based on what's happening in main events. However, I think it's really important to fold ADP in. If your league is very similar and these guys are all really smart and are doing a lot of work, and these are maybe the most informed, fantasy players out there. They're putting a lot on the line in terms of money, and they care about these things. It's good to, at the very least, know what the room might be thinking about players, right? So if you do like a player and his number is rising, his ADP is getting lower, and then you have to know that, I have to jump him further than I thought in my league. And it might be okay to jump him a whole round just to make sure I get him, So you kind of have to take your values, your value sheet. It's like the Yandy Diaz problem, where like Yandy Diaz is a value every time you look at the sheet. But you can't just take him exactly where the value is if the room might let you have another couple rounds.
Right.
Because you can still get that value 2 rounds later. So I am a proponent of using ADP analysis and looking at trends in ADPs and looking at what is happening. I don't know that I would only look at MEs. What I usually do is 15-teamers to try and make it look like my team that I'm doing. But I do want to know the most recent ADP because I'm going to have a dance between my set of values and what I think the room set of values is. And that dance is just what I'm saying. What if I don't want to jump Diaz if, what's the backup plan too? If I let him go and then somebody else jumps him, I have to have backup plans. So it's about looking at what you value and what you think the room values. And I honestly think if you don't look at what the room values, you're leaving opportunity on the table.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that. I think I've over time wondered if these results matter quite a bit less than I previously thought to everybody else playing fantasy baseball on other platforms.
Oh, right.
I mean, I think I'm kind of guilty of maybe overinflating NFBC drafts in general to a larger population of people that just they don't even know what it is. Like they're playing on Yahoo or ESPN or even Fantrax or wherever they're playing. Different room, different players, different buy-ins,
different settings.
Different settings and different rankings.
If you're not playing a weekly league, you're even playing a daily league. Don't not take Josh Lowe just because MEs are not taking Josh Lowe because they're worried that he won't play all the time.
Right. So I do think the value of those boards and those results, it's there. I think you have to be good at adjusting for context when you look at them. I think you can find sleepers. I think you can identify players that a generally sharp group of players really agrees on or likes, and I think that could be useful if you're not playing anywhere near that price point, even on that side at all. But the thing that is sort of related to this is if you don't even know what the player lists look like or how they're ordered. I mean, think about the differences, even just playing on Yahoo or ESPN. The games played by position thresholds are different. So you see different names on there. The ADP data is completely different because it opens at a different time and it's comprised of drafts of people with completely different goals. Like, I think the order of the players in the draft room is very influential in how people make decisions. So I think
in our league that we're doing right now, we have weird ass settings. And
thank you again for setting up the league, Jeff. Eno's going to send you a thank you card.
Thank you, Jeff. But it is really jarring to look at your value sheet and then be like, where is this player? You're like, the number one guy on my value sheet is I got to scroll down. Oh, there he is. So I'm dancing the dance in this draft. And there's a current player that I'm eyeing that I've been eyeing for 2 rounds. I've been leaving out there who's high on my value sheet and I want him and I keep letting him go and being like, please come back to me. And it's really annoying because I'm 15. So I really have to wait a long time and just watch that. And I'm just I'm not going to look at the draft. And then I'm like, is this the time? Or do I let him go another round? So, but he's not showing at the top of any of the lists when you sort them because the ADP isn't right. So I'll let you guys know if I get him at the end, but it's your settings and then what shows up in the chat bot. And to some extent, that's what looking at main events is the ADP, and it can lead you astray if your settings are totally different or your values are different. It does tell you a little bit about like where players usually go, which is still going to be information for you.
I think it's helpful when you go through the related, like where you want to draft, the Kentucky Derby style process, and you're trying to figure out your first 6 rounds, your first 8 rounds, who's likely to be there, what choices am I likely to have. I think that's where, if I'm playing in a main, I want to look at the other main results, see who jumps up, see who falls, and I can better have a plan, because those leagues do play differently than the other NFBC leagues. It's the time of year too, right? It's the buy-in, it's the time of year, it's the information we have, it's the helium hitting. Sandy Alcantara is going to be treated differently this weekend, next weekend, and weekend after that than he has been up to this point, because everything generally looks pretty good, and now we have that added information. And this type of player coming off of Tommy John surgery shows he's healthy in the spring. They move up every single year. So just how much and how aggressively people are moving him up, I think that kind of information is important if you're trying to play in that format, especially. But even in the broader, it's like, okay, there's reason to be confident here that you can push Sandy a little bit more. He might be buried on other sites. I haven't looked at ESPN and Yahoo. I don't know how far they bury guys that didn't pitch the previous season. I know we had for a while, Dave Gonzalez used to write like a hacking the draft room thing for The Athletic, looking at the different rooms and finding trends, buried players. I think that's as much doing your homework for a league on those sites as pulling ADP from other sites. Like, I would almost be, if I only had an hour to spend on it, I might spend my time digging through the draft room trying to find those undervalued players before draft day, because that's probably going to serve me a little better than what's happening over in the other ecosystem of high stakes.
That's a good point.
Couple of quick questions here as we go. Mailbag questions. This one is from Jay the Wolf. Could we comment on the third base battle between Gio Urshela and Luis Urias for the Athletics?
Is that a nickname you have for him there in the cryon?
Huicho. Yeah, it's his nickname.
Oh, what does that nickname mean?
I really should have looked that up before I put it on a cryon. I mean, they were calling him that like on the broadcast and stuff too. So if the broadcast steered me wrong in this case, I'd be very, very surprised. Yeah. It's on his baseball reference page, right? They wouldn't put a actually like bad nickname on there, would they?
No.
I trust baseball reference to do right in this instance.
I just don't know what it means. That's all it's asking. Yeah, I mean, Urshela is such a high floor guy that I kind of thought in my head that he's just got the job, and then they don't really have a backup shortstop, so I thought Urias was going to slot in as the backup shortstop. But I would say that offensively, Urias has more upside than Urshela. He's playing better in the spring, and there's always the chance that he gets it. I think they threw 2 darts at the dartboard basically with this one. And even if Urias is playing at third and he's the backup shortstop, that works. You could just move Urias to short if something happens to Jacob Wilson and put Gio at third. So I think that they'll both play. Is the short version? TL didn't listen. Is that they'll both get 400 plus plate appearances, and the difference between 400 and 550 is who's the nominal starter at the position, and I guess it could be Urias.
I'm starting to think it won't matter much beyond mono leagues, though, and I haven't really been interested in this position battle overall, because I think the answer might be the other Max Muncy, who already has played 50 games at AAA in this organization. He can play shortstop, so he could also probably slide over and play third base capably if they prefer Jacob Wilson defensively with the glove there, right? So I look at Muncy as the longer term threat. Like, maybe, I guess if you said pick between the two, give me Urias by a hair, even though it's been 2 pretty disappointing years between Boston, Seattle, trying to find a fit basically since leaving the Brewers. It hasn't really happened yet. He's just younger. I think Urias is just the more interesting player because they can do pretty similar things. But I think the answer, who ends the year with the job, might be Muncy or someone else who's not really on the big league roster yet.
Yeah, I do think left field and third base are the biggest sort of pain points and points of opportunity for young players in this organization. So it is worth thinking about a little bit, but don't break your brain too hard. It probably won't matter that much long term.
Thanks a lot for that question, Jay the Wolf. One from Gilded Age before we go. Any chance?
Explain your interest.
Any chance you could please share a deeper level of your impression on Jerar Encarnacion? I feel like in the bat speed discussion, other past episodes about the NL West and outfield rankings, you mentioned his name and it moved on very quickly. He was a Mets in 2023 in the minors with 200 strikeouts, but made massive gains in 2024. In 2023, swing striker was 17.9%. Zone contact rate was 67.3%. In 2024, 11.8% for the swing strike rate. Zone contact jumped to 82.1%. So given that he has elite bat speed and lofty max EV you often champion, I'd love to hear greater in-depth commentary on Encarnacion.
Yeah, I think one of the things that he just did was he was a lot more aggressive in the zone in the past. And I think the comp that I have for Jerar is Jorge Soler. And I think that the book on him was to basically fill up the zone with sliders, because if you look at his slider percentage with Miami, you can see that he was aggressive in the zone. He swung at them a lot in the zone. And what he's done now is to calm down on that. And I think that was Soler's big problem. Sliders in the zone was his big problem. But both of these guys have a decent sense of what the zone is, and both have extreme bat speed and extreme power upside. So if it clicks and he's Jorge Soler for cheap for them, I also, part of the interest is that as much as I love Wilmer Flores, I'm wondering how close he is to done. I mean, we're talking about advanced age for a guy that was a bit of a part-time player at his best, kind of maybe underrated, but kind of a guy who fit in when he was nearest to his peak, and now he's pretty far from his peak.
Yeah, I think that's part of it too. Some of it's the depth chart, some of it's the improvement that was even highlighted in the question, and some of it's just that Encarnacion hits the ball so hard. He has more buffer with that swing and miss anyway, and 28.6% in his first run with the Giants last year, even the small sample, is still like, hey, like that's enough damage for a K rate like that. We're happy with that. So
he'll run higher BABIPs because he hits it so hard. So yeah, he's going to have a slightly better batting average, and he's batting average dependent, so far. But another thing that can click with these guys, if they're murdering the ball, then pitchers become more careful, and they can walk just because they have an okay sense of the zone, and the pitchers become scared of them. I mean, that definitely happens.
I also, kind of noticed this pattern with a lot of minor leaguers that have to repeat a level. Sometimes it just takes a little more time to adjust to what a new level throws at you. You kind of see high K rates upon arrival. You've Double-A with the Marlins coming off the lost pandemic season, 38.1% K rate at Double-A. Went back to that level in 2022, 25.7%. And it's extreme, but I think even Austin Riley, I'm not saying Encarnacion is Austin Riley, but I remember correctly, Austin Riley was also a player like this, where you kind of would see year over year an adjustment phase at each level that he reached, and then he'd go back to that level and he'd be better. And that's not all that surprising. Like, just because you're making those adjustments in the minor leagues doesn't mean you won't make them in the big leagues. It may just take longer because it's the highest possible level, right? The stuff's even better. So I do think that's part of
definitely some natural swing and miss. So that caps his upside. He's 27. Right. So I'm not saying he's, going to be amazing, but 3-year Jorge Soler run, I think it's possible.
That would work. That would definitely work. We need to wrap things up. Eno has a chat to get to, so we are going to sign off on our way out the door. A reminder, you can join our Discord with the link in the show description. Find Eno on Bluesky, enosarris.bsky.social. Find me, dvr.bsky.social. Thanks to our producer, Brian Smith, for putting this episode together. Have a great weekend, everybody. We're back with you on Monday.
Thanks for listening.